Welcome to Xi Jinping Briefing. The content of the briefing includes what China's economic problems mean for the world. China's bid to hold sway over U.S. policy poses threat of our lifetime. China looks to relax cross-border data security controls. China is investing billions in global disinformation campaign, U.S. says. China spends billions on global disinformation, U.S. contends. What China's economic problems mean for the world. BBC. China's economic problems, including slow growth, high youth unemployment, and a struggling property market, are not expected to lead to a global catastrophe, but they will have an impact on certain groups and industries around the world. Multinational corporations that rely on China's consumer market, such as Apple and Volkswagen, will be affected as Chinese households spend less. The knock-on effects will then be felt by the thousands of suppliers and workers who rely on these companies. Furthermore, weak demand in China will result in lower prices, which could benefit Western consumers struggling with high inflation. However, there are longer-term concerns for developing countries that have received Chinese investment through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative. If China's economic problems persist, its commitment to these projects may suffer. While it is unclear how China's domestic economic situation will affect its foreign policy, some argue that a more vulnerable China may seek to repair relations with the West. However, there is no evidence to suggest China's approach is softening, and there are concerns that a downturn in the Chinese economy could impact how it deals with Taiwan. Although a full-blown collapse in the Chinese economy triggering financial meltdown around the world is a nightmare scenario, analysts believe it is unlikely. China's financial system is not dominant enough for there to be a direct global impact like the 2008 financial crisis. China's bid to hold sway over U.S. policy poses threat of our lifetime. South China Morning Post. The U.S. State Department's Global Engagement Center, GEC, has released a report accusing Chinese-owned parent company ByteDance of using TikTok to block Beijing's critics and attack dissenting views. The report claims ByteDance mobilizes automated bot networks to this end. A Senate Select Committee on Intelligence hearing earlier in the week discussed China's domination of the critical minerals sector, while also addressing Beijing's influence operations and alleged transnational repression. The hearing also covered potential updates to the Foreign Agent Registration Act, FARA, which monitors overseas lobbyists in the U.S. Alan Kohler, previously with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division and now president of Premier Consulting, said that China-related investigations now account for half of all counterintelligence work, totaling over 2,000 active investigations. The hearing also addressed the issue of unregistered Chinese police outposts in the U.S. Meanwhile, a Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources hearing raised concerns regarding U.S. vulnerability to China in the critical minerals sector. China looks to relax cross-border data security controls. Financial Times. China has announced new rules that would relax some of its cross-border data controls, in an attempt to appease foreign businesses concerned about the country's economic slowdown and deteriorating U.S.-China relations. The Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC, has unveiled draft rules that would clarify and simplify the transferring of data out of the country for ordinary business activities. Under the current rules, the CAC has been reviewing data export submissions from foreign groups wanting to share important data abroad, but the new draft rules state that only data explicitly categorized as important by government agencies would need to be submitted for security review. The new rules are open for public comment until mid-October. China is investing billions in global disinformation campaign, U.S. says. Wall Street Journal. The Chinese government has been investing billions of dollars annually in a global campaign of disinformation, according to a new State Department assessment. The report claims that Beijing is using online bot and troll armies, legal actions against critics of Chinese companies, and content-sharing agreements with media outlets in Latin America and Africa to promote its geopolitical aims and suppress criticism of its policies. The report also states that China is reinforcing Russia's misinformation about Ukraine, while Russia is promoting Chinese propaganda related to Taiwan and other Beijing interests. China spends billions on global disinformation, U.S. contends. Bloomberg. China is spending billions of dollars each year to enhance its global image, according to a report from the U.S. State Department's Global Engagement Center. The report claims that China spreads false information, amplifies propaganda, and suppresses dissenting voices in order to influence the international information environment. The report argues that unchecked Chinese efforts will reshape the global information landscape and could lead nations to subordinate their economic and security interests to Beijing's. The report focuses on China's activities in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. U.S.-China talks gather momentum, paving way for Xi Biden summit. Wall Street Journal. Chinese leader Xi Jinping may be planning a visit to the U.S., with high-level official exchanges between Beijing and Washington paving the way for a potential summit with President Biden. Both sides are discussing a trip to Washington by Vice Premier He Lifeng, who would be the most senior official to travel to the U.S. since Biden took office. Planning is also underway for Foreign Minister Wang Yi to visit Washington in October to prepare for a Xi-Biden summit. The two leaders last met in November 2022 and instructed officials to resume stalled talks on global priorities. The latest developments suggest an increased likelihood of Xi attending a summit of Asia-Pacific leaders in November in San Francisco. However, progress in relations remains tentative, with deep-seated suspicion and entrenched differences on most issues. Disagreements could still scuttle a summit or visits by senior Chinese officials. Beijing is also building alignment with Moscow to counter Washington and its allies. U.S.-China talks gain momentum, paving way for Xi-Biden summit. Wall Street Journal. Beijing and Washington are making moves to improve relations ahead of a potential visit to the U.S. by Chinese leader Xi Jinping. The two sides are discussing a trip to Washington by Xi's top economic policy aide, Vice Premier He Lifeng, and planning is also underway for Foreign Minister Wang Yi to visit Washington in October to prepare for a Xi summit with President Biden. Last week, both governments announced the establishment of two working groups to discuss economic and financial issues and a working group on trade and investment issues, marking a resumption of regular economic dialogue between the two countries. The latest developments suggest an increased likelihood of Xi attending a summit of Asia-Pacific leaders in November and a separate high-profile summit with Biden. However, progress in relations remains tentative and there are deep-seated suspicions and entrenched differences on most issues. The U.S. is concerned that a government shutdown would further delay planning for the meetings or the summit. Beijing is also continuing to build its alignment with Moscow to counter Washington and its allies. U.S.-China talks gain momentum, paving way for Xi-Biden summit. Wall Street Journal. China and the U.S. are working towards a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to the U.S., with high-level official exchanges and other steps being taken to improve relations, according to people familiar with the matter. Vice Premier He Lifeng, Xi's top economic policy aide, is being considered for a trip to Washington, while Foreign Minister Wang Yi is expected to visit the U.S. in October to prepare for a Xi-Biden summit. The moves come as both governments seek to stabilize their relations, which have been fraught with tensions for months. While progress remains tentative, there is an increased likelihood that Xi will attend an Asia-Pacific Leaders Summit in San Francisco in November. Russia's President Vladimir Putin will also meet Xi in October in Beijing, coinciding with a high-level forum on China's Belt and Road Infrastructure Program. The U.S. and China are seeking to restore regular economic dialogue and have established working groups on economic and financial issues, trade and investment, and export controls. U.S.-China talks gather momentum, paving way for Xi-Biden summit. Wall Street Journal. Chinese leader Xi Jinping may be planning a visit to the U.S. as the U.S. and China take steps to improve their relations. The U.S. and China are in discussions regarding the visit of He Lifeng, Vice Premier and top economic policy aide to Xi, to Washington. Planning is also underway for Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi to visit Washington in October to prepare for a Xi summit with President Joe Biden. These moves come after months of tensions between the two countries. Although progress remains tentative, there is an increased likelihood that Xi will attend a summit of Asia-Pacific leaders in San Francisco in November. The U.S. and China are also looking to hold a separate high-profile summit, which both governments hope will help to stabilize ties. However, deep-seated suspicion and differences on most issues remain, and disagreements could still scuttle the summit or visits by other senior Chinese officials. Politics hamper China's efforts to stimulate the economy. Economist. The Chinese government's hesitancy and caution in responding to the country's economic slowdown exposes the political and ideological constraints it faces in implementing stimulus measures, writes The Economist. Consumers have lost confidence, leading to a decline in spending and investment, particularly in the property market, and a downturn in exports. While China's monetary authority has cut interest rates slightly, policymakers fear that deep cuts could undermine faith in the currency and erode bank profitability. In addition, China's political system does not allow for activist central bankers, with President Xi Jinping being the only decision-maker. The current Prime Minister, Li Qiang, is weak in comparison to his predecessors, and his priorities are focused more on safeguarding security rather than prosperity. The property market remains a major concern, with sales of flats down significantly, but regulators are finding it difficult to recalibrate their ideological campaign against property speculation. The government is reluctant to help households directly, instead preferring methods such as public investment or tax cuts to boost the economy. However, the government's response to the slowdown has become more forceful in recent weeks, with measures such as extending tax breaks and issuing bonds. The economy also seems to be bottoming out, with improvements in exports, retail sales, industrial production, and consumer prices. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your trusty guide through the ever-changing world of 6 degrees. Today, we have delved into the economic, political, and informational landscape of China. Let's recap, shall we? First, we explored China's economic problems, which include slow growth, high youth unemployment, and a struggling property market. While these issues may not trigger a global catastrophe, they will have an impact on certain groups and industries around the world. Multinational corporations like Apple and Volkswagen, which rely on China's consumer market, will feel the effects as Chinese households spend less. This, in turn, will impact the thousands of suppliers and workers who depend on these companies. On the other hand, weak demand in China may result in lower prices, benefiting Western consumers struggling with high inflation. Developing countries that have received Chinese investment through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative may face longer-term concerns if China's economic problems persist. Next, we discussed China's disinformation campaigns and its influence on the international information environment. The Chinese government has been investing billions of dollars annually in spreading false information, amplifying propaganda, and suppressing dissenting voices. Through online bot and troll armies, legal actions against critics, and content-sharing agreements with media outlets, China aims to promote its geopolitical aims and suppress criticism of its policies. This disinformation campaign extends to reinforcing Russia's misinformation about Ukraine and promoting Chinese propaganda related to Taiwan and other Beijing interests. We then turned our attention to the US-China talks, which are gaining momentum and potentially paving the way for a summit between Chinese leader Xi Jinping and President Biden. Both sides are discussing high-level visits, with Vice Premier He Lifeng and Foreign Minister Wang Yi being considered for trips to Washington. These moves reflect a desire to improve relations, but deep-seated suspicion and differences on most issues remain. While progress is tentative, there is an increased likelihood of Xi attending a summit of Asia-Pacific leaders in November. Lastly, we examined the challenges China faces in stimulating its economy. The government's hesitancy to implement stimulus measures reveals the political and ideological constraints it faces. Consumers have lost confidence, leading to a decline in spending and investment, particularly in the property market. China's political system does not allow for activist central bankers, and decision-making ultimately lies with President Xi Jinping. The government's response to the slowdown has been cautious but has become more forceful in recent weeks, with measures such as tax breaks and issuing bonds. The economy seems to be showing signs of improvement, with positive indicators in exports, retail sales, industrial production, and consumer prices. In conclusion, China's economic problems, disinformation campaigns, diplomatic efforts, and economic stimulus attempts all have far-reaching implications. As the world watches, we must navigate the complexities of this global power. Join me in the discussion, my friends. What are your thoughts on China's economic challenges and its impact on the world? Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.